It's not only the killer's fingerprints, it's their signature. The monsters who created these mass murderers signed their names with a flourish at the bottom of their artwork. Well, there you are. That's it. We're about at the bottom of this old rabbit hole. And there's not a lot left to do now except to remind ourselves why we came. Why did we come here? What were we looking for? We came here looking for evidence that we were hoping would help us to develop a theory about what happened, and that would help us to answer some of the glaring questions left unanswered by the official explanation, the official theory of what happened. We came hoping to be able to develop a theory that would explain the facts in this case in a manner that wasn't ridiculous. Well, we've done that, I think. Now, the evidence in this case is not complete, but please remember that it doesn't have to be. The evidence proving how the solar system operates would be considered incomplete, incredibly complex, difficult to understand, and virtually unprovable to the ordinary person until the start of interplanetary space travel 50 years ago. Now, if most thinking people didn't accept Galileo's version of the solar system as soon as they heard it 400 years ago, they did accept it as soon as they compared it to the Pope's ridiculous story about giant crystal wheels rolling around inside a giant crystal ball. Galileo's theory of the solar system was based on very, very incomplete evidence, but it explained all of the evidence and it tied it together in a way that made sense. The theory that there was a flight instructor on the plane who was programmed to crash it into the sea is supported by all the evidence that there is, but it is incomplete. For example, at this point I can't tell you the name of the missing flight instructor. Maybe he was a prisoner, or a low-level contract agent, or maybe just some poor slob they dragged off the street and into one of their programming facilities. And the evidence is complicated. But knowing what we know about the forces of evil in this country, it shouldn't really require that much imagination to see this story as the most real and reasonable explanation of the evidence, especially when we compare this theory to the competing theory put forward by the NTSB, that an experienced, skilled, and careful pilot in a reliable aircraft with advanced safety features suddenly and for no apparent reason fell like a stone out of the sky. The NTSB theory can't begin to explain why the FAA ignored phone calls from a senator all night long. It doesn't explain why Bergen's story of radio contact was covered up. It can't explain Rourke's outrageous lies and mischaracterizations or all of the many missing pieces, and it sure in hell can't explain that fuel selector valve. With the theory of the program flight instructor, however, we can explain it all in a reasonable and coherent way. The plan was to commit the perfect crime, to grab the body of their Manchurian candidate, pull him out of the wreckage, and whisk him away, leaving no evidence of their crime. No one could ever possibly figure out how they did it. And they left no evidence, except for the 15-hour delay dispatching the search and rescue craft to the crash site. They must have let Georgie, Dick, and Rummy get involved. And as they have with the economy, energy, post-war Iraq, and Hurricane Katrina, they totally screwed it up. They let the plane sink. And then rather than go with Plan B and just let the flight instructor's body get recovered, they created this outrageous delay, without which this investigation would never have begun. The NTAP location was withheld from the Coast Guard and the Civil Air Patrol from 5 a.m. when it was available until the luggage began to wash up on the shore at 1 p.m. in order to give the bad guys time to recover the body of the flight instructor. Do you doubt me? They were out there. They were seen out there. Listen to this.
Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Stanley of the Civil Air Patrol, we appreciate your talking to us. If Kelly Tuthill is still standing by...
Richard Stanley has been out searching the dry land areas of Martha's Vineyard since 7:30 a.m. He's now speaking at 12:15 a.m. Listen closely.
In case the plane, in fact, had gone down. Go ahead.
Now, going back to what you had, you said you heard rumors of an NTAP west of...
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. I saw the Coast Guard out there. That's the only thing I had that would hint in that direction.
Okay. Yeah, there are reports that there were radar contacts within a few miles west of the vineyard. But,
yeah,
so you did see Coast Guard vessels out there searching?
Not vessels, helicopters.
Coast Guard helicopters?
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Okay?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sure thing.
Now wait a minute. Stanley is speaking at 12:15 about events he saw early that morning. Admiral Richard Larrabee of the Coast Guard said several times that the Coast Guard did not get the information necessary to begin a focused search until 1 p.m.
And by about 1 o'clock this afternoon, we had narrowed that focus down to an area of about 17 miles southwest of Martha's Vineyard.
A few minutes after the interview with Richard Stanley, Todd Bergen, the Coast Guard information officer, said the same thing, that he and the Coast Guard didn't have any radar information.
Yes.
And that's the last time the plane was heard from?
That is correct.
At approximately 2,500 feet, 10 miles offshore?
That's my understanding. Like I said, as far as that radar location, I do not have that information.
Officer, is there anything that I failed?
Remember at the Pentagon news conference, at about 1:30, Colonel Rourke insisted that despite the radar information, that they were not focusing on one area.
We'll continue on the same track that we're on, which is to search the entire area.
All these people say there was no information that would lead to a focused search of the waters off Martha's Vineyard, and yet Richard Stanley says...
Correct, yes.
Yeah. I saw the Coast Guard out there. That's the only thing I had that would hint in that direction.
Okay, yeah. There are...
No one was focusing on the crash site, but Stanley says he saw what he took to be the Coast Guard conducting a focused search off the west coast of Martha's Vineyard early in the morning. But that's not possible. In fact, just to be clear, the Coast Guard says it wasn't them. But if it wasn't the Coast Guard, then who was it? Well, we have an answer to that now, don't we? Granted, the evidence in this case is circumstantial. But that doesn't make it crazy to bring George W. up on charges. Crazy? Hell, it's not even unusual. It is part one of the absolutely basic standard operating procedure for any criminal prosecution, a two-step process that has put tens of thousands of Americans, perhaps hundreds of thousands, in prison today using less evidence than can be presented in this case. Step one of the process is to review the evidence, so let's do that quickly. 1. The guy's father was a murderer. John's refusal to accept the official version of his father's murder, his promotion of Oliver Stone, his commitment to publishing bold and important truths about the crimes committed by governments against their own citizens, and his real potential to seek and win high government office all made John a very real threat to the monsters who killed his father. 2. Bush Sr. earned the oil mafia's support for his presidency by killing John Kennedy Sr. His reward for participating in this murder was not only a place at the table of these killers, but, as we have seen, their guaranteed, undying support for his political career no matter how many times he lost. They picked him up, sewed him back together, and promoted him to higher and higher positions of political power. 3. Georgie is clearly now a leading member of this oil mafia, secretly sworn to serve their interests. While he has been president, the oil mafia's profits and prospects have soared through the roof. Of course, the American people pay. He may only be a stooge at this table, but he is a stooge not only with his seat, but with his own little nameplate marker at the table of this mafia, that you have to earn your membership in by committing a murder. So point 4 in the evidence is that George W., like his father, would also have to kill somebody to 5. Get the oil mafia to support him instead of McCain, and to get a place at their table, like his father before him. So who? That's the obvious question, isn't it? It should be the obvious question. Who do you suppose these sick and twisted bastards decided Georgie should kill to make his bone? They decided,
the father kills a father, the son should kill the son.
They liked the poetry of it. We have proved that John Kennedy Jr. was murdered. Can any reasonable person look at this mountain of evidence in the death of JFK Jr. and not see clear, unmistakable signs of foul play? We have part 1 of the requirements to bring this case to court. Very powerful circumstantial evidence, the only explanation for which is murder. Now, the best explanation, the most reasonable explanation, the most probable explanation for the available evidence will be accepted as proof in a criminal case if and only if it is also the only reasonable explanation. That is, if the only other explanation is ridiculously and unreasonably improbable, leaving no reasonable doubt. If this were a court case, George W. Bush would have to prove a reasonable alternative explanation for the facts we have presented here. He'd have to give a reasonable explanation for why the Dark Lord supported a coke-addled, draft-dodging loser instead of John McCain. He'd have to explain the FAA's ignoring of Senator Kennedy, and Rourke's lies, and that absolutely amazing fuel selector valve. He'd have to present a reasonable alternative explanation for these unusual events, or, he would have to provide an alibi for where he was on July 16, 1999, and he doesn't have one. Why the hell didn't his staff know where he was? Was he in bed with Colin, or was he in bed with Condoleezza, or both? Or Was he in a boat with Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Richard Myers in the waters off Martha's Vineyard, waiting